Welcome to another episode of Jay Leno's Garage. Today we're featuring 356 Porsches. Not just any Porsches, but some very special Porsches. Actually, one special and an Outlaw. I'm sure you've heard these terms when talking about Porsches, the Outlaw Porsches. This is the company that actually coined the term, and everybody sort of copied it from them. It's Emory Motorsports. They were here in California way back in the 40s. Then they moved up to Oregon. And now they're back. In fact, they're right around the corner from us. Let's meet Rod Emory. Rod, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jay. Thank you for having us on the show today.
Oh, thank you. I've read about you guys on Petrolicious and a bunch of the Porsche websites, and it's real exciting. Since I've got my 356, I really enjoy that car, so I kind of try to keep up when I can. And boy, beautiful, beautiful work.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I brought a couple of different cars out today to show you. One is a 1959 356 Sunroof Coupe. As you mentioned, you know, we're the guys that really coined the term 356 Outlaws. And,
right.
But really the history of our family dates all the way back, as you said, back into the 40s, right here in Burbank.
I think it's cool. I met your dad. Your grandfather started this back in the 40s, correct?
Correct.
And he was on the cover of Hop Up and Hot Rod and all the magazines, wasn't it?
Yeah, my grandfather, Neil Emory, had a shop here in Burbank called Valley Custom Shop that was that operated from 1948 until the early 60s. And you know, he was really one of the early customizers here in the Valley that was channeling and sectioning cars.
Right.
You had Barris and Winfield and the other guys that were, you know, a lot of them were chopping tops and doing some pretty radical stuff. When you looked at the cars that my grandfather built, it was hard to pick out exactly what he did because a lot of times he really just enhanced the design.
Right.
And so my grandfather had his shop here. It was a partnership between him and his brother-in-law Clayton Jensen. In the early 60s, my grandfather was given an opportunity to run the body shop at Chick Iverson Volkswagen Porsche in Newport Beach.
Okay.
I came around in the early 70s and started working with my grandfather and my uncle, learning the craft and trade of bending metal and doing body work and mechanically working on Porsches. And so from age 14, I was building these cars, and that was kind of at a period of time when the purists were really focused on making sure that the cars were perfect.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about, because you go to these Porsche events and you get, you know, this screw head should be turned a little more to the left. I mean, to the point where you go, guys, come on. So, I mean, do they come after you? Are you truly outlaws? I mean, do they embrace it now? And how long did it take for them to come around and go, gee, that's pretty cool?
Well, in the 80s, when my dad had Porsche parts obsolete, and we had a one-bay little mechanic shop in the back, and my dad had come back, and the two of us had, you know, screw hood straps on the hood, and we'd drill holes and put fog lights on the cars and lower them and polish the drums. A group of our friends would come up and say, oh, you guys are outlaws. They're never going to let you show up to the events. And that's really where that badge came about, was because a jeweler friend of ours made a badge that said 356 Outlaws. Because when we'd go to these events in the 80s and early 90s, there wasn't a class for us. There wasn't a place for us. And so oftentimes we were parked out in the dirt. And I can remember, you know, them being like, oh, you know, it's sacrilege. How, you know, how can you do that to these little 356s? But they were out there, while they were out there picking lint out of their air cleaners, my dad and I were ripping our cars through the hills and having fun. So it took some time for people to catch on and really understand that we're building cars that are designed to be driven. So let's personalize them a little bit and do what Porsche's always done.
And you can take out your stock Porsche engine, put it on the shelf or have it rebuilt, and put in one of your brand new, and you do brand new motors, basically billet, don't you?
We do. We do a number of different engine combinations, depending on what the budget is of the car, whether it's a car we're building for ourselves or we're building it for a client. You know, everything from the standard pushrod motor, which was a 1600 cc, you know, pushrod motor with 60 to 90 horsepower, all the way up to the 4-cylinder 911 version, like in the black car that we'll talk about, that's a 2.5 liter overhead cam motor that produces up to 200 horsepower. So it really gives us the ability to take everything that we love about these cars and you know, Porsche being an amazing design company and engineering company, you can take parts and pieces from some of the latest models and adapt them and make them work on these early cars.
How is the factory? Do they kind of recognize, give you a little pat on the back, or do they just sort of stand back? How do they?
Early on, they, you know,
Yeah.
they kind of looked at us
testy.
like, yeah, you know, what's going on here? But then in 1998, I had just finished building a car that was a very special bodied little 356, and my wife and my, at the time, 2-month-old son and I hooked up our trailer behind it, and we came pulling into the Monterey Historics in 1998, and a crowd came around the first Emory Special. And I can remember a group of old factory guys and mechanics come around and talking to each other in German, and then all of a sudden one of them looks over at the other and says, "When did we build this car?"
Right, right.
And so for me, that was a validation that we were on the right track, that we were building cars that, you know, didn't have parts that looked like they came from your local auto parts store, but instead the parts and pieces and components I try to put on these cars, I want it to look as if our cars were built in the Porsche Special build department.
Right, right.
And so Porsche does embrace it. You know, as you can see, there's a new trend that people are starting to really
Well, sure. I
you know,
see
accept.
Singer, I see Magnus Walker, I see a lot of companies coming in around Porsche. Now, when I asked you, this is an Outlaw, but that one is a Special. What's the difference between a Special and an Outlaw?
So an Outlaw, as we've been calling them since the late 80s, is really a car where the body itself is pretty much untouched. You know, we've removed the bumpers, maybe filled the bumper holes, put a gas filler through the hood, but you know, we haven't changed the rockers, we haven't changed the wheel arches, we've just taken the car and kind of raced it up a little bit.
Okay.
You know, put fog lights on it, given it additional performance, you know, capabilities. So this particular car has disc brakes, even though they're hidden, and special alloy wheels, even though they're understated.
I've seen this car racing through Malibu. I've chased it a couple of times. I've never caught it, but I go, I gotta find it, and it's out of, yeah. So I would see this at events, and I'd walk up to, where's the owner? He's around here somewhere. I could never find the guy. So I was thrilled when I saw it here today.
We put a 901 5-speed transmission in it.
Right.
So it's got a 911 transmission.
Right.
It's got 911 rear trailing arms, so it gets rid of that old swing axle, you know, oversteer situation.
Right.
And then the motor that we put in it is a 2.6 liter motor that produces almost 200 horsepower. And so it's just a nice driving car with a external oil cooler and all those things that make it just a great car to drive.
And the fun part is it looks factory Porsche 1959. I mean, I love the classic steering wheel, the classic 3 dials. Even, it looks to be the original radio. I'm sure it's probably up there.
It is. We take the radio and we put all new internal components in it so he can plug his iPhone into it.
I mean, you've done the proper upholstery and everything. It's really a beautiful car. Can we see the engine?
Absolutely.
Okay, there we go. Okay, now what did you start with here? Did you start with a Porsche Motor? Is it a totally new crankcase made from billet? What do you have?
Yeah, so this car would have normally had 1,600 cc's with 60 horsepower. And so now what we've got is we've got a 914 Porsche-based motor.
Okay, the 4-cylinder 914?
4-cylinder push-rod motor.
Okay.
That originally was a 2-liter motor. There's a company, Fat Performance, that takes those the 914 motor and then turns it into a 2650cc motor with 44 millimeter Weber carburetors, and then a Porsche 911 upright fan shroud to improve the cooling. It just becomes a very drivable, fun motor.
That's what I wanted to ask you. With obviously more horsepower comes more friction, comes more heat. No problem with cooling?
None whatsoever, because if you increase the fan size, then that brings more cooling over the cylinders.
Okay.
And then these motors, everybody always talks about them being air-cooled, but they're really air and oil-cooled.
Right, right.
And so the other thing that we do is we make them full flow and allow the oil to come out into an external filter and then cooler that also has an auxiliary fan. So what we end up with is a motor that has increased oil capacity and increased airflow, which makes it run much cooler. When we originally built this car a few years ago, this was the motor that we put in it. But this will eventually, I think, get one of the 4-cylinder 911 motors. And that's the beauty of these cars, is that you can mix and match and interchange stuff.
Is that a point, or is that a modern electronic?
It has a magnetic pickup in the ignition.
Gotcha. Well, beautifully done. And of course, there's the famous Outlaw badge.
Outlaw badge and louvers. I love louvers.
Yeah, I like louvers too. Boy, it's nicely done.
Well, thank you.
Nicely done. And of course, you started out with a sunroof coupe. You know, it wasn't that long ago, 15 years ago, you could buy these for $4,500. Now it's just gone crazy, isn't it?
It has. You know, the donor cars that we're buying these days, I think when we did this, it was $45,000 or $50,000 for the donor vehicle. Now they're 70 or 80. But
yeah.
Oftentimes when I'm building a car, I'm starting with a car that most people wouldn't be interested in, because I don't need a matching numbers car with a matching numbers motor and doors and all those pieces, because really I'm going to take and modify some of those things and change them. And because I'm going to put more power in them, more transmission, more brakes, I'm going to go through and on every car that we do, we put new floors, new longitudinals, and we also strengthen the longitudinal area and give the cars more torsional rigidity. So, so if the car has some rust issues before we start, it's okay.
Explain this here. I am not familiar with this piece. Did you guys make this? Was this a factory accessory that I was not aware of? Tell me about that.
So all of the pre 59 cars, so any cars previous to 1959, they didn't have a vent wing, so it was a one-piece window. And so in the late 50s, Porsche had an accessory vent wing, and then there were some aftermarket companies that also made some that clipped on, but they're getting extremely hard to find, and there aren't any reproductions out there. So what I did is I ended up finding a set of the lower pieces at the Porsche Literature event here in Los Angeles, and then we hand fabricated the rest of the pieces to be similar in design to the factory accessory.
Oh, beautifully done. All right, let's move over to the other car here, the Special.
Yeah, this particular car is a 1958. It was a non-sunroof car, and the car had all the typical, you know, rust issues and had clips in the body, nose and tail. On this particular car, what we did, we started with a non-sunroof 58, and if you look right here at this B-pillar, one of the most significant things that you see, it's been fattened up, angled forward.
Okay, it does look,
And then the corners have been radiused, as well as I removed the drip rail down the side. And then I found a sunroof out of a later 356 that was an electric sunroof. But rather than putting it in the stock location, I wanted to move it forward so you had a little bit more you know, wind in your face when it was open. I knew the car was going to sit low, and with the suspension that we put in it, I didn't want it to look like it was slammed on the ground, so I actually raised the wheel arches 2 inches, front and rear.
Because I must say, I can't, I mean, I don't think I could get a cigarette paper through there. I mean, does that not hit the fender when you're just hammering down the road?
It doesn't. The beauty of being able to, you know, build your suspension and build your wheels out of a 2-piece wheel is that you can set everything right where you want it. And so on this particular car, it's got 911 rear suspension, just like this one. So it doesn't have that typical swing axle arch. It has more of a 911 rear suspension geometry. The other thing is once we get the suspension put in the car, then I can set the offset of the wheels right where I want it.
And this piece here is looks like what factory race car is that off of?
Well, some of the Spiders, many of the Spiders had these side vents, and the reason those vents were on a Spider was so that you could get in and access the carburetors. On this car, I wanted to be able to give it a little personality and a little character, and so I love louvers, as I said earlier. So we built two louvered panels, one on the right, one on the left. The one on the right actually has the oil cooler with a fan that draws air through. And then this one, rather than having a fire bottle inside the car where it's going to, you know, get in your way, we actually house the electric fire bottle, fire system out here in this louvered panel.
I like these mirrors. These don't look Porsche to me. Where are these from?
Yeah, those are inspired by either the 356 GT cars, or they're oftentimes like on a Spider, 356 or you know, 550 Spiders and some of the Porsche race cars. And so we build mirrors for the cars that give it that racy look. And
beautiful. And you kept the bumpers on this one as well.
We did. And interesting you bring that up. One of the things that I do love bumpers on 356s, but oftentimes they're too big and bulky. And so what I did on this car is we took 3/4 of an inch out of the center of the bumper right here, thinned them up.
Oh, wow.
And then also, if you look at, see how tight the reveal is between the bumper and the body?
You don't really want to bump anything.
No,
yeah.
no.
It should be called a don't even come close to this as opposed to a bumper. You don't really be bumping people. Yeah, that's not going to work.
Well, it's I guess, a mount for the fog lights. But oftentimes, there's a big gap in here. Porsche, you know, left a fairly big gap so that the bumpers would interchange, you know, if there were, you know, on the production cars, but we went ahead and tightened all that up and gave it a nice tight reveal.
Now, dumb question, is there normally glass under here? Was this normally glass?
Well, there's a number of different lights and light options that 356s came with. These are actually the headlights that would have been like on a Speedster, so Speedster grills.
Well, let's go around to the back. Let's take a look at the motor on this one. A couple little things. I love the attention to detail. I like this Porsche 2500, hey, or 2.5. That's got a... people say, wait a minute, I never saw that.
Well, yeah, you know, it's one of those little subtle hints that there's something different underneath that deck lid.
It looks factory. And this, I'm surprised at this. Why the outside hinges?
Well, those hinges are modeled after the factory 911R, which, you know, gave you access to the motor. And I figured, you know, since we have this little hint that there's something else going on in there, that I wanted you to be able to open it up and
oh, I like that.
Flip it all the way over,
I like that.
So
that's
now you
nice.
can actually see what's going on in there.
Because
how many times have you been under the hood of your Carrera 2, you know, fiddling with the idles or whatever, and so yeah, this gives you better access to the engine. And
boy, so what motor did we start with here? Is it a 914, a 911 motor? Did you build the whole thing from billet? What?
So. Yeah, this particular motor is what you would refer to as a 4-cylinder 911 motor. And everybody says, well, isn't that a 912? Well, no, Porsche never built a 4-cylinder 911 motor, although in 1962, Porsche had one of their engineers, Paul Hensler, look at the feasibility of taking the 911 architecture, being a single overhead cam type motor, and building a 4-cylinder version. But they found that there were some limitations, and so they never moved forward with that design. But in the 80s, there were a couple of guys that said, hey, that was a pretty great idea. Let's see if we can make that happen. One of them was Chuck Beck that builds the Beck
Chuck.
550s.
I just saw Chuck. I was in Atlanta now. Yeah, he's a real character.
So Chuck was looking for a different type of a power plant to be able to put in his 904s and the other cars that he was doing. So he took a 2.7-liter 911 motor and hacked it in half and removed the two-cylinder, center cylinders and welded it back together and built this prototype motor. And there was another guy that was a good friend of ours. I've known him my whole life, Dean Palopoulos out of Temecula. And Dean did the same thing. So simultaneously, these two guys were kind of going after that same vision that Paul Hensler was, had visualized, years before. This motor is a later version of Dean's idea and his concept, and this is actually one of his latest motors that has a new cast case. So he perfected the package and then built new cast cases and then had new crankshafts built. So this particular motor is based on a 3.6-liter, like 964 or 993 architecture. So all the components internally, everything down to the valve train, the piston cylinders, the rods, the heads, everything is straight out of a 3.6-liter type motor. But you end up with this overhead cam, 200, anywhere from 180 to 200 horsepower, 4-cylinder 911 package.
But boy, it's just a beautiful job. What kind of horsepower are you making with this?
This motor is a 2.5-liter motor, and it makes 185 horsepower and about 180 foot-pounds of torque. Wow. So it's a twin-plug 2.5 with 48-millimeter IDA carburetors. So, it's a nice, smooth-running motor. It does have a few little, driving characteristics of a carbureted motor, but for the most part, it's a very nice, smooth driving motor.
Well, it's beautifully done. Can we take one of these for a ride? We're going to take this one out?
Yeah, let's take the black one out for a little drive today.
Let's take it out. Boy, it really goes good, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. Well, 1,950 pounds, got 185 horsepower and good brakes. It makes a pretty nice little peppy car. Yeah. Yeah, this is one of John Wilhoit's little short shifters. They work nice, they take a little getting used to if you're used to the long throw of a 356.
It's funny to have a 5-speed in a 356. It does like to rev, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it really starts to wake up at about, 4,500, and it just wants to keep pulling.
Yeah, it does. Then you got a nice cruising gear.
Yeah.
Boy, it really does. It's really fast. Wonderful. Stock steering box?
It is. It's just rebuilt, because you know how sloppy these things can be.
Yeah.
So we go through the steering box and make sure that all that stuff is as nice as we can make it.
Yeah, what happens is a lot of guys over the years, they do fixes on fixes on fixes, and then somebody buys a car and goes, oh, they're terrible cars. No, they're not. You don't. I see that with Vincent motorcycles all the time. Vincents are very specific. They're a very unusual motorcycle. They have to be set up properly. And you give them to a regular bike guy and they just bolt it together and they get wobble and they go, oh, they're not very good, they don't handle. They do if you set them up right.
Exactly.
I mean, the guys that built these things went to college. They're engineers.
What I love about Porsche is that these cars give you the ability, because Porsche was such an amazing engineering company, it gives you the ability to mix and match parts.
Yeah, and it's bulletproof.
Absolutely.
My favorite thing about Porsche is this is the size a sports car should be. They really shouldn't be much bigger than this. So many cars are so wide, even like the big Lamborghini Aventador and stuff, you always have one wheel on the yellow line, and just going around a corner normally, you're crossing the line. As a kid, I didn't appreciate cars like this because when you can get a Corvette with 400 horsepower, why would you want something with 60,
Right.
Because you're thinking like a teenager, Well, this car is very nice. Obviously, it's not my car, and I'm not familiar with 356s, but it doesn't seem unpredictable at all. I mean, a normal 356, you could really feel that wheel tucking under, but you don't get any of it here. I'm expecting it, but it doesn't happen. No, geez, it's really, it feels like a modern Porsche. I mean, it's as fast as a standard Carrera, I think, almost. I mean, obviously, standard Carrera has more horsepower, but it's also, what, 1,000 pounds heavier than this?
Absolutely, yeah. This car's just over 1,900 pounds.
Yeah. Well, let's take it up on the freeway. We'll put our foot in it, and just fun to hear this thing rev and watch that tack hit 7,000 like that. And nothing, no valve float. No, it'd probably go higher than that, wouldn't it? But I don't.
It will, yeah. I mean, you could, because it's 911 architecture, you can take this thing up to 75 or 8. But yeah, I think 7's about right.
Then I have to buy it.
That's right.
That's a whole nother problem. Well, if you watch these videos, sometimes you take longer test drives than others. And this was a long one because when a car is this pleasurable to drive, it's just pleasurable to drive. I don't think we've ever had a Porsche that broke down or overheated or with us pulling into the shop. You just take them out and you go. Yeah, this is just a wonderful car. In some ways, it's even more fun than a modern car because I just enjoy the rush of the torque. The P1s and the Aventadors, and those cars are all fine, but you put your foot in them, you go, and next thing you're going 150. This, you put it in second or third, you put your foot in it, you just watch the tack come around. It's just getting faster and faster, closer you get to 7,000 or 7,500. Boy, it's really an enjoyable car to drive. It's such a lightweight. Now we think of lightweight cars as 3,000 pounds.
Right.
That's a lightweight car. This is under 2,000 pounds. I mean, it's just amazing. And go to their website, check out the stuff that they do. These are the guys that coined the term outlaw, and they do a beautiful job. I mean, it really is a wonderful, wonderful car. Rod, thank you very much. And
Thank you.
I love the story of your family when your grandfather started, and then your dad did it, and now you're doing it. So it's fun to see these kind of artisans going from one generation to the next, because a lot of times when grandpa did something, nobody cares anymore. Those skills go out the window. So to see it passed on to son and then to grandson, and you have a son.
I do. I have a 17-year-old son.
Okay, there you go right there.
Lives and breathes these cars.
Keep it going for a long time. See you guys next week.
Mm-hmm.